Welcome everybody to our next edition of the Riley Blake Tabletopper of the Month. This month we are focused on our February themed tabletopper called Hearts. Now, if you've been working with us the last almost year, we have one more tabletopper after this one. We are pretty good masters of basic piecing now. So this is going to be a quick month, as all of the techniques in this particular project you have done in past months' tabletoppers with us. So let's take a look at our fabrics and our tabletopper. So first up, as I just want to review our fabric choices, you have your white background. We have a red blossom, you have the red 1/8 inch stripe, and you have the red texture, and this is called Peaches and Cream. This is a solid, no right or wrong side to the peach fabric. And then we have our binding our binding in this project is done out of this Peaches and Cream. It is cut 2 1/4. You do not have enough fabric to cut your binding at 2 1/2. So it is 2 1/4 inch binding, just like it calls for in the instructions. But just a note, don't get overly excited and start cutting 2 1/2. You're not going to have enough fabric. Now, I do also want to point out the red and white stripe. The stripe on this fabric runs parallel to the selvage. So when you are cutting these strips that you have to cut for your quilt, you're going to cut 4 1 1/2 inch strips. Make sure you're doing it so that you are cutting the width of fabric. We don't want to cut the length of fabric, because then these stripes are not going to run this direction. They'll end up running up and down. Would be okay, just a different look. So just make sure that when you are cutting this red and white stripe, that you are cutting it the width of fabric, not the length. But you've only got, what, 1/4 yard? So I think it's pretty obvious that you're not going to cut it the wrong way, but just a note for you. If I don't point it out, someone will make the mistake. So this month we are basically making one full block. You have a pieced sashing strip and a pieced cornerstone. And we are repeating that for the entire quilt. We have a flying geese unit that is put together to create this pinwheel. And so if we break this down into this little unit that's right there. Here, I will put my face up here so that you can see me talk, since I'm going to do more talking and pointing this month than normal. So breaking this unit down into the 4-patch that it is. Okay, so you've got basically this unit that's right here. We've got a flying geese with a solid background rectangle stitched to the top of it. We've done flying geese before. It's basically stitch and flip, draw your line on the back of your square, sew corner to corner, trim 1/4 inch away. The main point, or the main thing you want to pay attention to on this flying geese, is that you get the peach color on the right hand side of the rectangle, and your background color is on the left hand side of the rectangle. Okay, they need to go in this order. That way you get this secondary pinwheel that's happening. If you do it wrong, it's not really wrong. You just make sure that you do it incorrectly for all of them, so that then your peaches would be to the outside and you just have a different design element. Okay, this unit you're going to make 36 of. We are then going to make sure that they are 2 1/2 by 4 1/2. We are going to attach a 2 1/2 by 4 1/2 inch F rectangle. That's the background that you cut. And we are going to press the seam away from the flying geese unit. So you can see here, my seam goes towards the solid rectangle. We're then going to take 4 of those units. We're going to sew them together into groups of 2, paying attention that you have it going the right direction. Okay, so I highly suggest that maybe you stack all of your units up on top of each other so that all 9 of your pinwheel blocks are laid there and you don't accidentally get one of these flipped or rotated. We're going to sew them into groups of 2. You are going to press the seam towards the flying geese unit that's standing on its side. So we're going to press this direction all the time, because when we take that unit and flip it, that will allow this seam to nest right here in the corner. Now in the instructions, you'll see that they tell you to press that seam open. Yes, either press it open or swirl press this center. So it's completely up to you. We have pressed the seam open here, but if you're not a huge proponent of pressing seams open, if you swirl press it, you'll be able to get your seams to go in alternate directions, and that will give you a nice flat seam here in the center of your pinwheels. You're going to make 9 of these pinwheel units. These blocks should measure 8.5-inch squares. If they don't, that's just fine. Just get them all to measure the same measurement is the true goal. Now, the next thing that you're going to make, goodness gracious, this doesn't want to stay up on the table today, is we're going to make these little heart units. And we're going to take the heart units, and basically it's one shape. We have a left side and a right side. And all that's going to differ is where you put that white fabric in the corner. So we start with this red texture rectangle. We sew and flip the 2 J squares in the upper left and upper right corner, and we're going to press these seams open. And then depending on if you're making the left side or the right side will depend upon if you do the left lower corner of the rectangle or the right lower corner of the rectangle. Doesn't matter. Stitch and flip this corner, and then you're going to press that seam open. These rectangles should measure 2 inches by 3.5 inches. Once you have made 16 lefts and 16 rights, we are going to sew them together. So right sides together, and you're going to sew down the middle to generate your heart shape. This center seam you are going to press open. So center seam pressed open. This heart block should be a 3.5-inch square when you're finished. And again, you're going to make 16 of them. And then the final piece that we're going to assemble is this sashing unit. You are going to basically sew your rectangles together. Now, in your instructions, they have you cut these into rectangles. I think they are 6.5-inch long rectangles. If you wanted to take your C strips and your H strips, so these are the 1.5-inch units, and you wanted to sew a strip set, okay, so don't subcut them down into those 6.5-inch lengths. Sew yourself a strip set, red and white stripe between 2 white ones. Press those seams towards the stripe fabric. Then you can subcut a unit that's 6.5 inches. So if you have this whole unit sewn, then you can subcut 6.5, 6.5, 6.5. And that'll just save you, I think, will be a little more accurate if we are sewing longer with the fabric strips together. But it's completely up to you as to what you're comfortable with. If you want to pre-cut these into 6.5-inch lengths and then sew them, or sew them as one long width of fabric strip. This will be 3.5 by 6.5. We are then going to add these two 1.5 by 6.5-inch rectangles to each end to give us an 8.5-inch piece. These seams are getting pressed away from center. So this unit should be 3.5 by 8.5. If your blocks are not 8.5 and they're, let's say, 8.25 or even 8, you need to trim this unit down to match the size of your block. If you don't, you've got an 8.25-inch block and you've got an 8.5-inch unit right here, you are not going to get these to be able to meet and match. They're not going to be pretty here at this sashing and cornerstone intersection. So you need these rectangle sashing units to be the same size as your squares. All right, we need 24 of this 3.5 by 8.5-inch rectangle for our topper. Once you have all of those pieces assembled, we are going to lay it out and sew it together. Okay, so you have two types of rows. You have a sashing row and you have a block row. Sashing rows start and end with hearts. So they contain 4 hearts and 3 sashing units. And your block row contains 4 sashing units and 3 blocks. You have 4 sashing rows and 3 block rows that you are going to make. You're going to press the seams of your block rows towards the sashing strips. So these seams are going away from the block. The seams on the sashing row are going towards the sashing block as well. This will allow you to be able to nest the seam when you take a block row and lay it right sides together to a sashing row. Okay. So that you can see this way, when I lay this down, this seam is going to the right, this seam is going to the left. They intersect right at that point. I can match that up and I can pin this. And this will then hold that point together while I come over and I match up the next points that are intersecting seams. And those are the only places that I pin personally, is at those intersections. I don't typically put any pins in the center of the blocks, just at my intersections is where I'm at. And then once you have your row together, your block row and your sashing row, you can press the seam. In the instructions, they show you pressing the seam towards the sashing row. It's really not right or wrong. I would go in whatever direction has the least resistance for that particular project. So we've actually felt that this top row, it laid nicer and wanted to lay easier if we pressed towards the block unit. But on this row, it's towards the block unit as well. So we actually pressed away from the sashing, but it's not right or wrong. Go whatever direction works best for you. Now, once you have your topper together, it should be a 36.5-inch square or something around that point. It is time to layer and quilt. So let's take a look at the quilting features that we have in this table topper this month. So when I go to quilt this, for me, the first thing I would do is all my sashing rows. And you can see in the sashing row that they pretty much just echo quilted right around the block. So pretty much right inside of this. So this is a 1-inch strip, so about a 1/2 inch over, stitch down, around, up, and back through it. So I would go through and I would do that to all my sashing units, do that echo quilting type feature that's going on there. There is a little squiggle or decorative stitch down each center stripe fabric. Then I would come to, once those were done, I would come to quilting the center of my pinwheel. And you can see in the pinwheel centers, the red portion has this little swirl that's going through all 4 red flying geese units, and the peach has a echo quilting feature inside the peach. It looks about 1/4 of an inch away from the seam. Go through and do that with all of your block centers, and then you can choose, if you want, to stipple the background around all of your blocks. From what I can tell in the instructions and in the pictures, there doesn't look to be any sort of quilting in the hearts, which is just fine. You've got quilting here on all 4 sides. The distance from a set of quilting to a set of quilting is only about 3 inches, which should be pretty sufficient for your batting. But you should always read your batting package to tell you or give you the suggestion as to how many inches apart you need to be quilting with that particular batting. And that feature is there so that your batting doesn't clump up or fall or sag in that particular area. But there doesn't look to be any quilting in the actual hearts. But again, it's secured on all sides with the sashing unit, so we should be just fine. Then once you are quilted, you are ready to use that peaches and cream 2 1/4 inch strips to bind your table topper. Well, I appreciate everyone joining us today and look forward to seeing your finished February Hearts table toppers. Thanks everybody, and have a great day.